Newly hired youth minister got me kicked out of church for no reason. I found out he had been screwing a deacon's wife, and I helped the deacon ruin his life. TLDR, church youth minister spread false rumors about me and got me kicked out of the church I had attended my whole life for no reason other than pure meanness. I found a guy who hated him even more than I did, and I gave the guy information that he used to do a very artful and thorough job of completely ruining the youth minister's life. He got fired and blacklisted, couldn't find another job. By chance, I saw him several years later, working a lousy job. About 6 to 7 years ago, I was a ministerial student at a conservative Christian college. I had attended the same Bible-believing church since I was a small child. It was large, about 1,000 members, but not a mega church. This church had been an enormous part of my life for as long as I could remember. I played piano for youth choir, preached at the children's church service, drove the church bus to pick up unchurched children, and more. I did all of this for free, not even getting reimbursed for expenses. During my senior year in college, we got a new minister of music, education, and youth. This guy was as charming as an ice cream sundae with razor blades in it. I'll call him Mr. Charming. All of the deacons and their wives thought he walked on water. He was an authoritarian. In his first meeting with the church youth group, he announced that he had been hired to straighten out the youth group. One of his favorite sayings was, "When I tell my disciples jump, the only questions they get to ask are how high and how far." The adults loved him and the youth hated him. Within a few weeks, half of the high school and college students, all of those without parents in the church, had quit coming to church. Most youth directors would have gotten into trouble over this, but he had the audacity to proclaim, in front of the entire congregation in the Sunday morning worship service, that he had eliminated all of the thorny ground from the youth group, and the pastor and all of the deacons loved him for it. He didn't waste any time going after what he really wanted, the pastor's job. The pastor, whom I'll call Pastor T, was about 60 years old. Within a few weeks of Mr. Charming's arrival, rumors started circulating about Pastor T's health and that he just didn't seem to be as mentally sharp as he used to be. Worst of all, however, was the accusation that he was really too liberal for the church. In my denomination, it is the kiss of death to even be suspected of being a liberal. None of these accusations made any sense, but people kept talking about them. I have no idea why the pastor didn't find out. Or maybe he did find out and was just too scared to do anything about it. In some denominations, like Catholic or Methodist, the denomination assigns pastors. Not my church's denomination. Each church calls the minister. This guarantees that every pastor always walks a razor's edge. The slightest slip and you're out. You don't even have to slip. Maybe you even do the right thing, and it still offends enough people. Then you're out. Or maybe, like Pastor T, some creep just lies about you and gets your job. And then I became a target. I still don't know why. A couple of months after starting to work for my church, Mr. Charming called me and informed me that my services were no longer needed at youth choir, children's church, bus ministry, anywhere. In fact, he said he did not even want me to participate in any of these functions at all, not even go to the Sunday morning worship service. I later found out that members of his family had been hired by the church to perform these functions that I've been doing for free. His wife got paid more for playing a beat-up piano at the 1-hour youth choir rehearsal than the main organist/pianist got paid for playing for adult choir rehearsal plus Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings when a youth choir sang. The wife could barely pick out the notes on a piano. This lady radiated bitterness and repressed anger, but she rarely said anything. She just sat there and glared, which was somehow even creepier than when she spoke. I was very hurt emotionally. So I dropped by Pastor T's office and tearfully asked him what I'd done wrong. I couldn't get a straight answer, except he told me that people are saying things about me and that if I wanted to get a good recommendation from him to our denomination's minister's school, I'd better shut up and do what you're told. So I started asking all of my church friends what people were saying about me. Everyone said, "Well, I didn't want to tell you and I don't believe it, but here's what I heard." According to the rumor mill, I'd gotten my girlfriend pregnant and forced her to have an abortion, and I'd been arrested for possession of marijuana, and my dad had to pay a bunch of money to hush it up. There were other rumors, but you get the idea. I did what Pastor T told me to. I never darkened the door of that church again, except once, months later. It hurt like hell. I devoted my life to that church since I was a little kid. But I had to have Pastor T's recommendation to get into the minister's school I wanted to go to, and the pain was unbearable just driving by there. So I decided to keep my distance. But I started thinking about Mr. Charming. Anyone who was that evil had to have a past, and it probably wasn't a good one. I knew that just before working for my church, he had worked at a large church in the same denomination in a small town about 50 miles away. That church was actually about twice the size of my church. So he had moved from a big church to the same job at a smaller church. A bad career move? Running away from something? There was something rotten in Denmark. As luck would have it, one of my uncles and his family lived in that same small town, although none of my family attended Mr. Charming's former church. So I called one of my cousins, told her my story, and enlisted her as a co-conspirator. I'll call her in. The next Sunday morning, and I attended Sunday school and morning worship at Mr. Charming's old church. Although, and had never been a member of that church, it was a small town where everyone knew everyone, so she knew most of the people there. She started asking about Mr. Charming and got an earful. Every one of her friends said that Mr. Charming was a world-class creep. He would flirt with and even make suggestive comments to all of the girls in the youth group, even those in junior high. He was 40-plus years old and had a wife and 3 children of his own. And then there was the touching. Never anything obvious or illegal. But he loved to put his hands all over the young ladies whenever their parents weren't around. But just like at my former church, the adults loved him because he kept the youth in line. Our investigation went on for several weeks. I kept a low profile so as not to arouse suspicion. Mostly, I just stood around, ate donuts, drank coffee, and talked about football, and did most of the work because she knew so many people, and it was perfectly natural for her to attend this church in her hometown, even if it was not the church she usually attended. After church was over, we would go to her house, have a delicious Sunday lunch cooked by my aunt, and then write down everything we had learned. By then, his whole family was in on my investigation. They were as angry as I was about the way I'd been treated. Within a few weeks, I was sure that all I had to do was drive a few of these young ladies and their parents down to my old church, let them tell their stories to the parents of a few girls in the youth group, and Mr. Charming would become Mr. Unemployed. But it kept getting better and better, and I kept digging. Finally, after a month or so, and grabbed me by the sleeve and said, "You've got to hear this." She introduced me to a well-dressed, very large guy, maybe 30 to 35 years old. I'll call him Fred. We slipped off into a Sunday school room where we would not be overheard. It turned out that Mr. Charming had had a multi-year affair with Fred's wife. Fred had kept his cool when he found out, talked with a lawyer, and had spent months gathering evidence. Text messages, voicemails, emails, even photos and videos with Fred's wife and Mr. Charming in them. Apparently, Mr. Charming got stimulated by watching videos of himself with Fred's wife. Then Mr. Charming would send the videos to Fred's wife, and they both would have cyber sex while texting each other. Later, they would hook up the old-fashioned way and make more videos. Finally, Fred confronted his wife. She denied everything, but the evidence was just too much. Fred told her he wanted a divorce, full custody of the children, their house, his retirement money, his business, her engagement and wedding rings, everything, even the dog. She hired a lawyer, but laws and courts being what they are in this rural Bible Belt county, her lawyer told her that if the judge saw the videos, she'd be lucky if she ended up in a homeless shelter with all of her worldly possessions under her bunk in a garbage sack. Then Fred turned his attention to Mr. Charming. Fred still sincerely loved his wife and was convinced that Mr. Charming had deliberately ruined his marriage. Taking Mr. Charming to court, suing him for loss of consortium, and otherwise making him legally miserable would take too long. Many people around here prefer a more direct approach. Fred scheduled an appointment with Mr. Charming in his church office, who did not suspect a thing because Fred was a deacon and his children were in the church youth group. Remember that I said Fred was big? 6'6" at least, 300 pounds, and if there was an inch of fat on him, he hit it well. Fred told me that he brought several friends with him. One friend blocked the door, another unplugged the phone. A third one stood behind Mr. Charming and encouraged him to stay seated in his chair. Fred made Mr. Charming watch about 10 minutes of one of the videos, then calmly said, "I'm going to stand here and watch you pack up your stuff, then you're going to walk out of this building and never show your ass in this town again. Or we'll be back." Mr. Charming did as he was told. A month later, he had a new job at another church, my old church, and started ruining another whole set of lives, including mine. Fred did not know where Mr. Charming had gone. He had been led to believe that Mr. Charming had moved out of state. He was surprised and angered to learn that this scumbag was only 50 miles away. The next day, I drove back up there and gave him a copy of the directory of my old church. It had home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses for pretty much every member of the church. I marked some of the church's major financial donors. I explained my situation with Pastor T and asked that my name not be mentioned. "No problem," he said. The next Sunday, I could not resist visiting my old church to see how things were going. Mr. Charming was nowhere to be seen, nor was any explanation given about what had happened to him. One weird thing, though, the pastor looked scared. His voice, usually resonant, loud, and almost musically baritone, trembled during the whole sermon. I slipped in just before the service started and made a point of sitting in the very front row, center pew. The look on his face when he saw me was worth all of my trouble. I didn't know it at the time, but Fred had gotten right to work and done a very thorough job. The whole church had received multiple anonymous emails with photos and videos of Mr. Charming and Fred's wife in various compromising positions and states of undress. Deacons and major donors received emails plus express mail packages just for good measure. Mr. Charming and Pastor T were left out. They didn't know anything until the phone calls started pouring in. After the worship service, it didn't take long for my church friends to figure out why I was there. It was very gratifying. I was something of a hero, although I kept swearing that I had no idea what they were talking about. Things continued to blow up in my former church for months afterward. Both Pastor T and the pastor of Mr. Charming's old church almost lost their jobs because they had lied to my old church's committee of deacons, who had recommended hiring Mr. Charming, about why he had left his old job. But somehow they managed to stay in the pulpits at their churches, although a lot of church members left my former church, which caused some financial problems. There was talk of legal action for sending unsolicited pornography to little old ladies and other people in the church. But nobody ever was able to prove that Fred did it. I don't think they tried very hard. After all, his wife was in the videos and photos. Both churches really did not want this to become a court case because at that point, the fact that Mr. Charming had spent years screwing a deacon's wife while he had unlimited, unsupervised access to dozens of church youth would then become a matter of public record. So they hushed it up. I never saw Pastor T again. I had lost all of the trust and respect that I had for him, and I was sure that he had figured out that I was somehow connected to the whole fiasco. So my chances of having a preaching career in my denomination were precisely zero. By that time, being a pastor like Pastor T was the last thing I wanted anyway. I withdrew my application to minister's school and eventually completed a doctorate in archaeology at a different grad school, magna cum laude. I've been teaching at a large public university in the Midwest of the USA with summer gigs on archaeological digs in Europe. And I am very happy. One last, very gratifying event. The reason for this post. All that happened 6 to 7 years ago. Fast forward to last March. I went to pick up a friend at a large downtown urban bus station in the US. Everyone hates this place. Not only is it crowded, it is poorly maintained and filthy. It smells like spoiled garbage mixed with diesel exhaust and seldom cleaned public restrooms. My friend's bus was late. I stopped by the newsstand to get myself a soda and candy bar. Who do you think was restocking the shelves? Mr. Charming. I just sat across from a newsstand and enjoyed my drink and snack. He recognized me, then turned away. I just sat and watched him restocking shelves full of magazines and junk food. Revenge is a feast that is best enjoyed cold. Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We use that to our advantage. Here I am, writing this long tale on my honeymoon, but it does feel cathartic to finally type it out, and my husband is more excited about this than the resort drinks. Anyway, this is a throwaway because I don't have a Reddit account, and my husband, the Reddit fanatic, said he doesn't want this associated with his main. As to why the Reddit guy isn't the one writing this, it's because he said, since it's my family, I should be the one with the honor of posting the story, but he is looking over my shoulder to help out. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if this works, but I do not give permission for this to be reposted anywhere else. So, I think first it's necessary to give some background to explain how this behavior reached this level and why our responses were as they were. It's a long read, I apologize. Ever since I could remember, my parents love my sister more. I don't mean in subtle ways either. If my sister accused me of something, they believe it and punish me. If I accused her, they wouldn't believe me. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd still give her a lesser punishment and try to find a way to scold me in tandem. My birthday cake had to be a flavor she wanted. Hers did not, and my parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her a bit more than for me. We went to where she wanted, even if it was an event that should be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me. She just used me as a punching bag. But at first, she mostly ignored me. It got really bad when we were young teens. I'm not sure what the cause and effect are, but she found herself with no friends, and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move? Did they ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close, and my parents loved to boast about her achievements, but never mentioned any issues, whereas with me, they loved to bring out any flaws of mine constantly as teasing material. I only knew she had none because we went to the same school, and I noticed her no longer walking around with people. Anyway, she had no friends. I did. I used to be decently popular. My sister realized that, and suddenly I stopped being the occasional punching bag to a hated person she needed to take down at all times. She started accusing me of more stuff. She accused my friends of more stuff. My parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone, with excuses ranging from "they're not good people according to your sister" to "why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of my family lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something, and I sadly replied I'm not allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self with no filter replied that it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. Well, that reached the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month. But after that, they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of extended family knowing her social status was bad, and she demanded to be changed. My parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. But she made friends in the new school. However, she never went back to the previous status quo of mostly ignoring me. I guess having felt the power of how badly she could screw with me, and anger that I told family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life was still bad. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never called friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them, or my sister would accuse them of taking stuff, and they'd believe it. I did become close to my cousins, though, since my parents never dared do any of that to family. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but my parents insisted. At one point, we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him, by which he meant she came over with skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes really badly, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different tale, that my boyfriend had instead tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused, since how could she do that to me? Guess what my parents believed? Now, my boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him. For mean reason. But remember that back then, I was a teen and suffering from the unfair bad treatment. I was very resentful and moody, and now hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight, and since they liked showing love via food, my sister was also overweight, whereas I was not. In fact, I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters. Personality is. But my sister was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything, since she could demand and my parents would deliver. Added to that the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model. Even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my boyfriend would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard and the relationship ended. I did get another, But again, my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that meant I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo and Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school, as I was fine with making out with boys but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why couldn't I be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well, the unequal treatment continued at this time. She had more spending money. Her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. And when pointed out, they deny they ever said that or claim it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I didn't know her grades were bad in school, though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents, naturally, made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from her room or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict, etc. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. She told me since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and wait until my sister finished uni to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no. That is because they were so caring towards me, and I had such bad judgment, they would decide if a college was worth my getting in debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore and never believed in my capabilities. Anyway, I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay it if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out, my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came and I worked and got a scholarship. Not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via parents, I put my achievement on social media at the same time I told them. Even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now, they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasting about it. Then I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them. My sister stopped going to college, moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well, almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people that say that if I was in X situation, I'd have done something? My husband is the type that really does. I'm the person that is meek and a doormat in any situation and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person that can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy that claps back immediately. He loves drama, and that he loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just stewing something worse for revenge. He's the one that wanted me to post here and wanted to post on a revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled I got together with him. But just because I was incapable of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At this point, my parents naturally demanded they meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but it was hard. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went alone and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful shit they wanted. Babe, we can mess them up so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding, on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuses were that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister had at least the experience of it. On my venue, with pictures being taken and the dress, and she'd have a cake later too, etc. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge. Instant karma. Nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that shit like some sort of great gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole catalog of insults about to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these folks along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So, my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over this, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also in danger of getting us sued. So we eventually settled for the most benign plan. Act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is mostly my husband, but he want me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents. He said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, He didn't see the issue and, not wanting family to fall apart, will be down to helping them do it. He pointed out I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave, and that would mollify me. He said my parents looked surprised, my grown sister starting skipping with joy, literally so like a kid. So it was accepted. Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and boyfriends in the past, I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, and my husband and I were milking them. How? Well, rather than pay for the wedding than lay low, of course my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, my husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game, or so they thought. What we did was thus: we'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out, then sigh and say it's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options. Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with photographer. Flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other, tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers, and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes, then simply not using it, but my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they really kept communications outside any text. We made sure that had happened by, when my sister tried messaging my husband, have me reply to her. This solidified the I'm controlling and neurotic claims my husband was making. So they believed it and never risked anything in writing. And maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. But I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge. But he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus cost on our honeymoon, having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spending a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband was enjoying the whole tricking them more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws. But here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents, sister, and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it and walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric for my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place, showing them as proof he'd ruined the dress. He then said he had to go back to me as I was raging, and he needed to calm me down, and he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security, a guy that looked like a bodyguard. We told him to not allow anyone my sister in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents had a text my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance, as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready. This because if my husband or bridesmaids took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, as willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing, the doors opened, and I came in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. And then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled something came up. There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied and in a teary voice said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandon me there, that the sister thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am, so I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" so that as many people as possible could hear and spread it. Then went, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better, joking my sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar. And don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character and started smiling. Well, what happened is, it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I received afterward. My sister did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in. Per our agreement, he claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it'd be too late and tried to demand he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over and started shouting and insulting my sister, asking what was going on. Basically stalling. My mom soon came and eventually other people. At this point, the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now is damage control, as everyone that learned about it was aghast. They tried to pull it and screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and threw my husband under the bus. At this point, my husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied. To quote him, "Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss." He denied having ever agreed to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was crying, and apparently sat on the floor, kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated, why would he ever agree to something so messed up? He tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get ripped apart by anyone and everyone that came out to check the drama was delicious. After years and years of being accused of stuff and not believed, to watch them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, my sister was still on the floor, crying and screaming. They kept insisting my husband wasn't on it, but people kept asking why would he agree, why was there no proof, why did they want my sister to do this to my wedding? And they had no good answer to any of it. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. Maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says all the expensive stuff they were eating and drinking certainly helps. We had a blast. My husband maintained a forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing, the three have tried to contact me. I refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart thing because my sister did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months, and hoped that I'd get cheated on by him. She did also suggest he was cheating on me with her, actually. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages of my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to my family group chat. And sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him. But he kept up the "you're delusional. I never agreed to anything" shtick, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in said group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged family to help stop them from trying to ruin my honeymoon now that they had failed to ruin my wedding, then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations to avoid my parents sending my sister over, and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to cheat on her in our honeymoon suite. My family assured him they'd take care of it. And indeed, since then we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would have preferred to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Did I mention why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I have wondered this all my life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled, so I quit trying. I've thought of so many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. It took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late, so they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. And they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help. So they resented me. But that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition. As in, they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it'd even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it and they couldn't backtrack or else risk my sister turning on them. My grandmother put greedy preachers in their places. Twice, even after she died. TL/DR. My grandmother generously served her Bible-believing Christian church for almost 50 years without asking anything in return. But when she became elderly, disabled, and homebound, her church acted like she did not exist until she was in hospice care and literally on her deathbed, when that church showed a sudden interest in telling Grandma to remember your church in your will. She waited until exactly the right moment, in front of exactly the right audience, to expose these greedy assholes for what they were. Twice. My grandmother was a member of a large conservative Bible-believing church for her entire adult life. This church, which I'll call Big White Church, was a member of a large evangelical denomination. Big White Church was located in a prosperous suburb of a large city in the Bible Belt of the deep south of the USA. Grandma was very active in Big White Church. She worked in the nursery every Sunday morning, helped cook hundreds of church fellowship breakfasts and dinners, accompanied her children and grandchildren on dozens of church retreats and choir tours, taught youth Bible study on Sunday nights, and was very active in supporting home missions, as well as helping with other youth programs. She always tithed and often gave extra for missions and special offerings. Grandma's greatest talent was making other people feel important. I've seen this firsthand many times. Although I belonged to a different church, I often visited with Grandma, and when I did, I usually went to Big White Church functions with her. I've seen her single-handedly cook breakfast for dozens of Big White Church youth, a task which took over 2 hours, even in the church's large kitchen. Then, after the meal, she asked the group for a round of applause for the high school student leader for doing such a great job of organizing the prayer breakfast. I remember that on a Big White Church youth retreat at a rural church camp, she drove most of the night to go back to the city and retrieve a big box of evangelistic materials that one of the assistant pastors, whom I'll call Ass Pastor, had forgotten and asked her to get in time for our morning program the next day. His boss, the senior pastor, I'll call him Pompous Pastor, never found out that Ass Pastor had screwed up or that Grandma had fixed it for him. Ass Pastor never even thanked Grandma. Even though I was a child, this bothered me so much that I asked her about it. She said that she didn't mind at all. She told me her reward would be that those materials would help children find Jesus. Grandma's service to her church ended abruptly at the age of 73 when she broke her back in a car accident. Afterwards, for the last 10 years of her life, she was homebound and could not go to church because of this injury and declining health due to old age. Her mind was just as sharp as ever, and her faith remained sincere, but her body wore out a little more every day. During those 10 years, she made many efforts to reach out to her church, its leadership and her church friends, inviting them to visit her at her home, etc., without success. Every one of these invitations was declined or simply ignored. Near the end, when she was in home hospice care, she decided to plan her own funeral. She and my grandpa called her church and asked for the senior pastor, Pompous Pastor, whom she had known for over 30 years, to visit her so that they could plan her memorial service, which she and Grandpa wanted to be held at the church. Pompous Pastor was too busy, but Ass Pastor stopped by a few days later. According to my grandpa, here's what happened at that meeting, with my grandma literally on her deathbed. Grandma, Grandpa, and Ass Pastor discussed her funeral for a couple of minutes. Then Ass Pastor started pressuring her to lay up your treasure in heaven by remembering your church in your will. Grandpa told him firmly that this is neither the time nor the place to discuss her will. They went back to discussing the funeral for a few minutes. Then Ass Pastor steered the conversation back to Grandma's will, with liberal injections of how badly her church needed her support. Grandpa told him several times that it was inappropriate to talk to Grandma about her will or the church's financial needs, because she was terminally ill and in an enormous amount of physical pain. Ass Pastor would agree and briefly talk about the funeral, but would then go back to talking about the church's financial needs, heavenly rewards, where your treasure is your heart will be also, etc. My grandma started crying. To put this into context, Grandma was more than a steel magnolia. She was titanium coated with diamond wrapped in Kevlar. She rarely ever cried and never ever cried about herself. Not one tear when the doctor told her that her back was broken so badly that she would never walk again, nor during the following 6 months in futile rehab. She would shed sincere but well-managed tears at funerals and while visiting family members in the hospital when they received bad news. She would cry to console others, weep with those who weep. But nobody, not Grandpa, not her daughter, nor any of my uncles or grandma's siblings, ever remembered her crying for herself. My grandma was sobbing uncontrollably. Grandpa, a retired steelworker, former Marine sergeant, and Korean War combat veteran, physically grabbed Pastor and escorted him out of their house, not too gently. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Grandma lived another 6 months, mostly because of sheer force of will. Eventually, though, Grandma passed away and we held her memorial service at the funeral home, not Big White Church. Pompous pastor and ass pastor were conspicuously absent. In fact, there were no professional Christians from Big White Church at the service at all, not even in the audience. To start the service, Grandpa stood up at the podium in front of the crowd and said, "Some of you may have heard that I disinvited pompous pastor and ass pastor from this funeral service. This service is not an appropriate place for me to give you my reasons for doing this, although you all know me, and so you know that my reasons are good ones. Also, my wife asked me to exclude them. This funeral service may be different from other funerals that you have attended. It is going to be an open microphone funeral. Everyone who wants to say something is invited to come up here and describe your friendship with my wife. Tell a story about her that is worth remembering, or anything else that you want to say that will honor her memory and bring comfort to everyone here today. I have asked several family members to prepare statements, but you don't have to have anything prepared. Please, if you want to say something, come up here and do so." There were about 100 people at the funeral service. At least a third of them eventually stepped up to the microphone. The service, which we had planned to last about 30 minutes, lasted for over 2 hours, and, as best I can tell, not one person left early. There was laughing, crying, and hugging. 3 of her grandchildren played some of her favorite songs on the piano and guitar, and we all joined hands and sang her favorite hymns. Afterwards, dozens of people told my grandpa that it was one of the most comforting and uplifting funerals they had ever attended. More than a few remarked that funerals are better without preachers anyway, or something similar. Remembering her pastors and her church in her will, the 1-2 punch. A couple of weeks later, it was time to start distributing the bequests in Grandma's will. Although Grandma and Grandpa dearly loved each other, they had separate wills because she told my mom that makes it easier for us to respect each other's turf, and because their lawyer had recommended it. Nobody thought that my grandparents were wealthy. They had lived in the same small but charming house in a prosperous, well-maintained suburban neighborhood for the past 50-plus years, and had worked hard and lived modestly. But it was rumored that they had a very nice nest egg. Of course, there is no legal requirement for anyone to attend the reading of the will or to even have a reading. Modern telecommunications and near-universal literacy have made this quaint custom practically extinct. But the reading of the will was a tradition in our family because it was one of those events that gave our close-knit, extended family an excuse to get together. We never had family reunions. They were too difficult to schedule for our large family. But we got together at birthdays, holidays, funerals, baptisms, etc., so that if you attended several of these, you would see just about every one of your cousins, aunts, uncles, and even great-aunts and uncles who were grandma's and grandpa's siblings and in-laws. With this family tradition in mind, many of our family members' wills often contained very personal bequests of items that had little cash value, but were the departed family members' way of telling their loved ones that they wanted to share a cherished memory with them one last time. As an added incentive to attend, the family rumor mill had been buzzing with speculation, encouraged by Grandpa, that grandmas will contain some surprises. The reading was held in a conference room at a lawyer's office. Unsurprisingly, the attendees included my mom, as well as aunts, uncles, great-aunts, great-uncles, and many of the grandchildren. We were all surprised, however, to see pompous pastor and ass pastor from Big White Church. They informed us that Grandma's lawyer had told them that grandmas will have bequests not only for Big White Church, but also for them personally. Maybe it was just our imagination, but my siblings, cousins, and I couldn't help noticing that these preachers appeared to be actively salivating over their good fortune at Grandma's generosity. Grandma had a large family, so a sizable number of beneficiaries were named in her will. The lawyer's conference room was a bit smaller than an average middle-class living room. Extra chairs had been brought in. Every seat was filled, and people were standing in every remaining space. There was barely space for all of us. Grandma's lawyer suggested that pompous pastor and ass pastor sit in chairs which were in the front of the room next to himself. Since there was a large table in the room, This meant that the lawyer and these two preachers were the only ones who were directly facing everyone else. Although the preachers were gratified to be physically next to the center of attention, they did not notice, as all of the rest of us quickly noticed, that these seats made it easy for everyone else in the room to watch them closely, and practically impossible for them to leave the packed to more than overflowing room before the entire meeting was over, because they were farthest from the room's single door, and there were almost 24 people standing or sitting between them and their only path to escape. The bequests were quite generous, but pretty much what we had expected. Grandpa kept their house, its contents, their retirement accounts, and everything that remained after all of the bequests had been satisfied. Children, grandchildren, and several local charities received nice, but not extravagant amounts of money. Several sentimental items were named and given to various friends and relatives. Grandpa was first beneficiary listed in the will, but after him, all of the other bequests were arranged in order of increasing worth. They started with sentimental items, which had very small cash value. Then each grandchild received several $1,000s. Then each son, daughter, brother, sister, niece, and nephew received a little more. Then several local nonprofits received very nice amounts, etc. Bequests to Big White Church, Pompous Pastor, and Ass Pastor were almost the last ones listed in the will. They listened politely to the other bequests, but with steadily growing anticipation as they noticed the exponential upward trend in Grandma's largesse. When Grandma's lawyer got to the Big White Church and preacher's part of the will, he said, "This is a bit unusual, but before I announce these bequests to Big White Church, Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor, in this Grandma's name, requested that I read the following statement to everyone present." He opened a letter that was written in Grandma's own handwriting. For the past 10 years, not one person from Big White Church has ever called me, come to visit me, or sent me a note to tell me that they cared about me. Not one minister, not one deacon, not one of the church women, not one of the church members who I worked with for all of those years, loved dearly, and thought were my friends. I worked very hard for you when you needed me, for many, many years. But when I needed you in your church, you all pretended that I didn't exist. I only got one visit, when I was dying, and I invited Pompous Pastor to come to my house and help me plan my funeral. This was my last attempt, after many attempts that I had made over the past 10 years, to reach out to my church and pastor, whom I still loved dearly even though they had made it clear that they did not love me. If only I could have my funeral at my church, maybe some of my church friends, whom I had not seen in a decade, would come to the service to see me one last time. And I know they love to hear Pompous Pastor preach, so if he preached at my funeral, maybe they would come to my funeral to hear him, even if they would not have come to see me. But Pompous Pastor couldn't find the time to visit me, or even call me to tell me whether or not he was willing to preach at my funeral. Ass Pastor came by my house, but he didn't want to talk about my funeral. He just wanted me to remember his church in my will. That's all. Just remember his church in my will. It was then that I realized that I had allowed my church to break my heart for one last time. But that was the last time. The very last time. Ass Pastor did not know it when he visited me. But Grandpa and I had already prepared my will long before his visit, which did include a double tithe, 20% of my entire estate, for what was now my former church, Big White Church. This amount was named the amount, an enormous amount of money, generating muffled wows from many of her heirs, including me. But I got a feeling badly that we had not personally remembered such nice people as Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor. So I changed my will to include them by name. While I was at it, I changed the amount of money that I left to Big White Church to match all of the love that they have showed to me during the last 10 years of my life, when I was suffering and lonely and no longer able to work my ass off for them for free like I had done for almost half a century. That is her entire written statement, the lawyer said. Now, let's get back to the bequests in the will. Bequest to Ass Pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Pompous Pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Big White Church, 1 cent. The Pompous Pastor and Ass Pastor sat there looking like someone had just injected a gallon of Novocaine into their jaws. Every one of Grandma's family and friends felt an overwhelming urge to laugh out loud. But we kept quiet because we knew Grandma. We knew she wasn't finished yet. Grandma was simply setting them up for a 1-2 punch. The best was yet to come, and we didn't want to miss it. There's one last bequest, the lawyer continued, for a charity called, which he named, and I'll call Black Charity. Then he paused before naming the amount. Most of us had no idea what Black Charity was. But by the looks on their faces, we could tell that pompous pastor and ass pastor knew Black Charity very well. Their faces displayed the same expressions of shock, dread, and horror that they would have if the lawyer had said, "This bequest goes to the demonic baby eaters to buy extra large rotisserie barbecue grills and tons of charcoal." Every eye in the room was now fixated on pompous pastor and ass pastor. The lawyer, who happened to be my uncle, one of Grandma's and Grandpa's sons, let the silence continue a few seconds more. If we had been able to read pompous pastors and ass pastors' minds, we would have known the history behind the looks on their faces. Black Charity was sponsored by a large black church just a few miles from Big White Church. They ran a free food/clothing bank, assistance programs for foster children, home delivery of pre-cooked meals for homebound seniors, legal aid, and other social services. A long time ago, Big White Church, which was and still is 100% Caucasian, had provided a few years of financial and other support to Black Charity. Then there was a very bitter, acrimonious breakup, allegedly because Black Charity was practicing the social gospel, while Big White Church was preaching the true gospel. Big White Church even sued to try to get some of their money back, although the suit was eventually settled and very little money actually changed hands. But this being the Deep South, everyone knew the real reason why Big White Church, or any white church, would stop supporting a Black Charity. Those people were getting uppity and not staying in their place. Grandma and Grandpa had seriously considered leaving Big White Church at that time, but they had reasoned that it was better to stay there and teach tolerance by their words and example. They knew they would never persuade everyone, but maybe they could reach some of the youth at their white church and break the generational cycle of racism. Grandma used to tell us, "My church is my mission field." We did not learn the true depth of her statement until after she died. Since then, Grandma and Grandpa had secretly sent a portion of their tithe to Black Charity every month. Most of Grandma's family, including me, didn't find out about any of this until after the meeting had ended. But pompous pastor and ass pastor obviously understood what Grandma, by her actions which are more powerful than words, was saying to them. If you had grown up as a white person in the Deep South as Grandma, Grandpa, pompous pastor, and ass pastor had, you would understand. To many white Southerners, this was one of the most personally insulting things you could do to them. It simultaneously labeled them as racists, condemned their bigotry, and crushed their delusions of white superiority by saying, "These black human beings, whom you hate, disrespect, and have mistreated, are better people than you are. So they deserve my money more than you do." Having allowed time for everyone to observe pompous pastor and ass pastor while they thought about how their white church had treated this Black Charity and how they, in their church, had treated our grandma, the lawyer said, "The amount is..." Then he named the exact same amount that Grandma had named in her handwritten letter, the huge amount of money that would have gone to Big White Church if she had not changed her will.